Pleased to say we're joined once again by the Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Mr Jenrick, good to have you in the studio this morning. Clearly a lot to discuss around the situation in Kent, but let's start with a not unrelated topic, Brexit and the state of play as regards the trade negotiations. Can you just be as candid as you possibly can be about the likelihood of us getting a deal this side of the new year, not even this side of Christmas?
Well, I'm still reasonably optimistic, but there's no news to report to you this morning. There's still the same serious areas of disagreement, whether that's on fisheries or the level playing field. We're working through those issues. Our negotiators will keep going. The Prime Minister's been very clear that he's going to negotiate until the very end, which is the 31st of December, because that's the right thing. I think that's what the British public would expect. But at the moment, there isn't sufficient progress. It isn't a deal that the Prime Minister feels that he can sign us up to, because it doesn't yet respect us in full as a sovereign independent nation.
Do you see, therefore, as indeed some of your colleagues in the Conservative Party do, a link between what has been happening as regards the border with France and the Brexit negotiations?
Well, I hope not. I mean, you can see that countries react in different ways to COVID, and we ourselves have put restrictions on other countries at times when the facts have changed, and we've wanted to fully understand and appraise those before coming to a balanced judgment. Here, France was relatively unusual. The European Commission itself advised the European Union member states not to pursue travel bans of this kind, and that may well have played a role in reaching the resolution that we did last night.
But am I correct to detect, on your part, and perhaps more so from the Prime Minister and the words that have been expressed, more than a degree of frustration about the way that the French have handled this?
Well, look, I think we have had productive discussions over the last 24, 48 hours. They have reached what seems like a sensible way forwards. There's going to be quite a lot of work to do in the next few days, and this isn't going to be an issue that will be resolved immediately, as you've heard from your correspondent. I wish events hadn't played out in the way they have, but they have. We now have to move on and ensure that traffic can flow as quickly as possible across the Channel.
Part of the solution, obviously, with France is testing. When do we believe that we will be seeing people getting onto the ferries as a result of these tests?
Well, I hope that this morning you'll see people and HGVs crossing the Channel at the short straits. We're putting in place the infrastructure, so the armed forces will be doing that in the first instance to help us to set that up and to get through some of the backlog that you've seen. They will then in turn hand over to civilians who will take this forward. We have a good operation in Kent that's been tested very significantly in the last few days, led by the Kent Resilience Forum, but it has performed well. So the work that had been done over a number of years to create the facility at Manston Airport, to create Operation Stack on the motorway, has worked quite successfully, but there is now a great deal to do. The procedures are there. There will be testing at Manston and at multiple other locations. If you test positive using the swift lateral flow test, you'll then be offered a PCR test, so you can get an even more refined outcome. If you test positive again, you will then be offered COVID-secure hotel accommodation, and we've procured the first one of those not so far away. So the HGV drivers will be able to drive there, leave their lorry there, and self-isolate for the 10 days before they're then able to cross the Channel successfully.
Can we be specific then? How many vehicles and therefore how many drivers do we think are currently in Kent in need of these tests?
Well, as of 7 p.m. last night, which are the last figures that I saw, there were just under 3,000 HGVs parked at Manston Airport, and there were about 700 to 800 in other settings as part of our operations, so Operation Stack, where they're parked on the M20. There may be, as you've reported, that other HGVs and smaller vehicles are parked elsewhere in Kent because they've chosen not to come into the official operation. So the true number may be slightly higher than that. That's whatever the number is, whether it's 4,000 or more, it's a significant number to work through. So the message from Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, last night is an important one, that if you are an HGV driver, if you're thinking of crossing the short straits, don't come to Kent just yet. Hold off until we've worked our way through most of that backlog. It won't speed up your journey. In fact, you'll just likely get stuck in something that's unfortunate, and you'd be better off staying where you are.
But just on something you said there, this process is going to take days, isn't it, to clear the backlog, as you just said?
I think it will take a few days to work our way through.
And that by necessity means that the delays and the issues with the supply chain, they are not coming to a conclusion anytime soon either.
Well, they will ease up because I hope the HGVs will be crossing the channel this morning, and so the position will start to gradually improve. But I think it will take time. We have put all the resources, as I say, the armed forces and others are working very hard to resolve this. But just on the wider point about supply chains, it is an issue. I don't dispute that. But for members of the public, it is important to remember with respect to food that there is no material shortage of food. The supermarkets have all come out to say that their supply chains are robust. If we all behave, rationally, if we all just shop for what we need for Christmas in the normal way, there shouldn't be any problem whatsoever. What
does the situation as regards to the testing of haulage drivers, what effect does that have on people wishing to travel to the continent, to France in future? Are we all going to have to take a test before we cross borders?
Well, for the next few days, this protocol that we've agreed will stay in place, I think, until the 6th of January. It will be reviewed on the 31st of December. So for that relatively short period, you will need to go to the border armed with a negative lateral flow test that's been conducted in the last 72 hours if you want to cross, whether you're an HGV driver or somebody else. Of course, travel is discouraged at the moment, so the relatively few people will be crossing the border. They'll likely either be people who are going for a good reason because they're HGV drivers, bus drivers, train drivers, or they'll be returning citizens to the continent. But
that cut-off date of the 6th of January, I mean, of course, the European Union may well decide to extend the period for which they're demanding this kind of testing.
Well, we've got no reason to believe that. Okay. This arrangement's been put in place relatively swiftly. It'll be kept under review. Of course, all over Europe and indeed the world, people are now thinking carefully about this variant and other variants, which are likely to be quite prevalent in a number of European countries. So it may well be that over the course of the remainder of the month, a different conclusion is reached.
Let's talk about community testing, shall we? 17 areas have been identified as additional sites for the rollout of community testing. Can we just be clear about this? The areas that you have picked for this testing are areas which are at risk of greater restriction?
Well, they are the areas where the virus is strongest, where it's rising fast, where there are particular challenges, like it may be rising fast amongst the over 60s, the people who are most likely to be unwell. We want to target our resources in the places where it's needed the most. It's also a significant effort doing this for the local councils, for the local NHS, and so they won't want to do this lightly, so we're focusing the effort in the places that need it the most.
But you will have seen the papers this morning and widespread reporting that there will be areas moving into tougher restrictions, perhaps all the way to Tier 4 on Boxing Day. When can we expect that announcement?
Well, we don't have a timetable for that. The government's COVID Operations Committee is meeting later today to review further evidence. We keep this under review. We're constantly hearing from our scientific advisors about what we should do. The new variant, I think, is very worrying. The situation with the virus was concerning before that, but the new variant is very concerning. It's only been 5 days since we learnt about its true transmissibility, the level of concern we face with it,
and we have more evidence of all of that
is rising.
As well.
It is very concentrated in London and the South East, but we've also heard now that it's prevalent probably in most regions of the country, albeit to a lesser extent. And so it may be necessary to take further action. But
there will be those who say, look, Friday we heard about this, Saturday London and the South East went into Tier 4 lockdown. There doesn't seem to be the same impetus, there doesn't seem to be the same drive to get other areas which may be at risk of widespread transmission into that kind of state of lockdown again.
Well, we moved very rapidly for the places you're discussing. It's not just London, it's London and the wider South East and a number of other places like Peterborough, for example. They're a little bit further afield. We moved swiftly to do that. The Prime Minister only received the clear advice on Friday. The COVID Operations Committee met Friday and Saturday. A decision was made and announced Saturday afternoon. We've now had time to think again about whether further action is required in other parts of the country, and that's the decision that the Prime Minister and other ministers will need to take in the next couple of days. The new variant, as I say, is much less prevalent elsewhere, but there is rising evidence that you can find it in a range of other parts of the country. And so the question is whether we should take action now to try to head that off.
Yeah, but literally now. I mean, we're about to see people who are not in Tier 4 areas have not a normal Christmas by any means. We all admit that. But there will be households mixing indoors in the environments in which we understand the first variant of COVID-19 spread most rapidly. The question is, why are we not doing this now, and why are we still permitting large parts of the country, many millions of people, to mix together?
Well, we have taken action in the rest of the country. There are only 1 or 2 places which are currently in Tier 1, which is the most relaxed form of restriction. Vast swathes of the country are in Tier 3, where they are facing significant challenges, which were considered very tough until the last week, when we've added Tier 4 to the mix. So it's not as if the rest of the country is having an easy ride. All parts of the country have clear guidelines and rules to follow. The best thing everyone can do at home, regardless of where they live, is to continue following the guidance as best they possibly can. And Christmas is going to be very different whether you live in Cornwall or in central London. Yeah. Either way, you're not going to meet many people, and we're asking people outside of Tier 4 areas to exercise great care, only to come together with a small number of people and only for Christmas Day. If we need to change that in light of the new variant, then we won't hesitate to do so.
What do you make of Nicola Sturgeon and her apology for her breach of the COVID rules in Scotland? Now, we all understand that there are breaches large and small over previous weeks, but when a politician does it, interest seems to peak. What's your view?
Well, I don't think it's helpful for me to comment on other individuals. Lots of people make mistakes.
They certainly
with the
do.
Rules. It's never easy. We're all human beings at the end of the day. But we all have to learn from that and try our best to follow the guidelines, because we can see that we're not just doing this for ourselves, we're doing it for wider society as well.
Minister, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us. And I should, of course, wish you a happy Christmas.
Yeah, you too.
Because we will not be seeing you before then, I'm sure. Do take care.
Thanks.
Just a reminder that if you want to catch up on any of that interview or watch the programme when you're out and about this morning, plenty of ways in which you can do so. You can find us on the mobile app. You can head to the website and click on the button. Go into the live blog and you can watch the programme live. You can even switch on your telly. Our political correspondent, Kate McCann, was listening in to our discussion with Mr Jenrick. What leapt out to you?
I tell you what, that almost the very last thing that Robert Jenrick said to you there, I think is fascinating, because you were talking about other people mixing outside of Tier 4 over Christmas, having a family Christmas relatively if you're in a lower tier. And he said, if we need to change that in light of the new variant, we won't hesitate to do so. That's a government minister saying that potentially there could be changes to people's Christmases just a couple of days before Christmas. That tells you how seriously they are now considering potentially moving people into Tier 4. Now, there is a suggestion that that would happen on Boxing Day. It wouldn't happen over Christmas, but I think from that conversation, what's really clear is that the government is now even more worried about this new variant than we thought.
Well, you will have seen the same data that I have seen, those reasonable worst-case scenarios plotted by the government's own data. And we are looking, if nothing changes, by February, at deaths in excess of 5,000 a week. I mean, there is a real sense of urgency in the scientific community. We're just waiting to see what the politicians do with this.
Yeah, and we're also waiting for data, remember,
Sure.
Crucial data, because we know that, as Robert Jenrick said there, that London and the South East is where this new variant has been focused at the moment. We also do know that it has spread outside of those areas. It's very prevalent in Wales, for example. But the question is how prevalent. And I don't think that was clear from Robert Jenrick there. I don't think he was clear about how prevalent the virus is outside of those areas. And that's going to be key to finding out what happens next and how quickly that does happen, because we saw some data yesterday, provisional data in the northwest, that this is now growing, that there's been an exponential rise of cases there. If that is the case for the rest of the country, I wouldn't be surprised if we did see some action taken today. Whether or not it comes in over Christmas or Boxing Day is another matter.
Well, if you hear about any